Good day, everyone. So for today, we will be discussing anthropological view of the
So,
self.
as we know that
But first, we have
anthropology
to
is the
know or we
study of
have to
human
define
societies and culture and
what
their
is
development from the
anthropology.
past, his present condition, and even his future. So, it is mainly concerned with how cultural and biological processes interact to shape human experience. And it also deals with the modern trends in anthropology, especially in understanding humans in relation to culture. So let us now begin by recognizing our own unique cultural processes. We often wonder, how does anthropology explain human nature? Their perspectives lies on the assumption that self is both biological and a cultural entity. This means that self is an animal species which underwent the process of biological evolution and has shared characteristics with other living animals. The self is believed to have evolved from apes million years ago and trace his origin from the hominid species or the Homo sapiens. Human species survived, evolved, and have learned to adapt to their ever-changing environment, which resulted in the development of culture, resulting in behavioral changes. So, it is said that the self is a living animal, but definitely superior to other animals because of the following factors that make human distinct. So we have this physical aspect and the social aspect. So in physical aspect, we can say that humans have larger brain capacity, making self-rational. So compared to other uh, to our ancestors, mas malaki daw yung brain natin. Yung brain capacity natin mas malaki. Therefore, it has the ability to process complex information. And unlike dun sa ating mga ninuno, we can stand erect, allowing better mobility compared sa mga ninuno natin na mga apes. Sa social aspect naman, we have learned and make use of language to communicate effectively as well as symbols in order to preserve history, knowledge, and culture. And we can work cooperatively with others also. As well, we are able to invent new things for survival. We are studying anthropology. We must first define what is culture. So culture is traditionally defined as a system of human behavior and beliefs. It covers all customs, mores, and capabilities of human as they function in the society. And these are complex form of knowledge, practices, and other aspects needed by human to function in the society. So we can say that culture is symbolic. Symbolic because when early men learned to use tools, it became an essential part of our culture. Culture, therefore, is learned and is integrated in one's belief, and it is deeply rooted in the patterns of systems of one's life. We can also say that culture can be adaptive or maladaptive, since communities shall continue to assess whether the practices and rituals and customary actions are still relevant and beneficial to the development of community. Therefore, we need to understand the concept of enculturation. So, enculturation is the transmission of culture from one generation to the next. So, it is done through observation, the use of knowledge, adaptation to environment, rituals, and formal and informal education. Therefore, members of the community can distinguish themselves from others because of their differences in the ways they do things. So now we're going to discuss the self and the person in contemporary anthropology. So what is anthropological self? So anthropological self takes a holistic dimension of the individual person as it considers both biological and environmental aspects of the person. The genetic component plays a significant role in the cultural development of an individual. Anthropology suggests that the genes of the person living in a particular community are already a necessary component for enculturation of the person. So in the same way, environmental exposure is also a vital component in the creation of cultural self. Some anthropologists claim that environmental exposure starts soon after birth. However, contemporary anthropology suggests that the environmental exposure starts during conception and solidifies as soon as the child is born. So the growing years of the child is crucial in anthropological perspective because this is the time when the child develops psychological construct of independency and dependency. So the rearing practices are the key development of the neuromotor functions of the child, and this neuromotor circuitry is fundamental in the formation of awareness. So now on to self-awareness. Self-awareness is that which permits one to assume responsibility for one's own conduct, to learn to react with others, and to assume a variety of roles. Study shows that a child starts to develop self-awareness at the age of 2. However, studies also shows that self-awareness is conceptualized earlier if the child sleeps with their parents and are exposed to a variety of stimuli like touch. So stimulation is maximized when the child has a stronger contact with the mother or the primary caregiver. Study shows that it helps develop neural circuitry faster compared to children with less stimulation from caregivers. Parents, immediate family, and the community play a vital role in the development of child's values. When the child observes from what the others or what the adults are doing or thinking, will more likely be adopted and imitated by the child. But in the continued process, the child develops his or her own identity. And this identity can intensify by practice, which is common to all cultures. Naming. Naming, it gives a person a sense of identity and a position within a community. Additionally, it has evolved into a status symbol that can convey honor or disgrace. And as a result, the person who goes by that name continues to build a reputation in the community. So the concept of the looking glass self states that part of how we see ourselves comes from our perception of how others sees us. So Charles Horton Cooley stated that the degree of personal insecurity that we display in social situations is determined by what we believe other people think of us. So a person's self grows out of a person's social interaction with others. So the views of ourselves come from the contemplation of personal qualities and impressions of how others perceives us. So now we proceed to self and behavioral environment. So we have 4 environmental orientation. We have object orientation, spatial orientation, temporal orientation and normative orientation. So in order to strengthen the identity of self, one must be able to grasp the different behavioral orientation. And this concept will help situate the self in different behavioral conditions. So first, object orientation. It is the position the self in relation to surrounding objects. Second, spatial orientation. It provides the self with personal space in relation to other people or things. Temporal orientation. It endows the self with sense of time. The normative orientation. It provides the self with grasp of accepted norms in the community. So, if we will going to explain this environmental orientation, so we can say, for example, the spatial orientation, wherein it provides the self with personal space in relation to other people or things. So, for example, people in Western culture, they value their personal space. Kapag nakikipag-usap sila sa ibang tao, they don't want a very close contact. Gusto nila may distance. Okay? Because for them, they value the personal space. But compared to Eastern culture, like for example sa atin, mas gusto natin pag nakikipag-usap tayo ng mas malapit. Okay? Kasi ganun yung orientation natin eh. Okay? So, in terms of temporal orientation naman, wherein it endows the self with sense of time, okay? For another example, yung mga Westerners, they value their time. So, when they say na ang call time ay 8 o'clock, 5 minutes before 8 o'clock, nandun na sila sa venue ng meeting. Compared sa Filipino time, wherein sa kultura natin, and it became known globally, that pag sinabi mong Filipino time, late. Kasi pag sinabi natin, example, ang call time is 8 o'clock. So normally, darating na yan, 10 o'clock na. Kasi 8 o'clock pa lang siya magigising. So, ganun yung difference ng kultura, okay? In individualistic and in collectivist orientation. Okay. So, in terms of normative orientation naman, wherein it provides the self with grasp of accepted norms in the community. So, you must be aware kung ano yung accepted, kung ano yung katanggap-tanggap, okay, na mga ways of life o behavior or action sa isang lugar, okay, o sa isang environment. Para hindi kayo maging outcast. Kasi kung gagawa kayo ng isang bagay na hindi pa siya acceptable as norms dun sa lugar na yun, then magkakaroon kayo ng problema in building relationship with others. Okay? So, the self embedded in culture. So, ano naman ang ibig sabihin nito? So, the ability to manage the differences between selves is what makes the self embedded in the culture. So when the self is able to distinguish what is acceptable behavior and what is not, then it only follows that the self is already able to recognize the difference of oneself and the other. And the ability to distinguish these differences between self is what makes the self embedded in the culture. So psychological anthropologists recognize this as cultural self, which may include feelings, thoughts, experiences, biological and psychological constitutions, language and memory, and actual self, is also being shaped by these same elements and more. Therefore, what remains in this distinction is the solid identity of the self in relation to everything else. So the claim of the self as embedded in the culture can only be embraced when the self recognizes its relation to everything else. So the complexity of cultural identities of people, things, and events shall be recognized and respected by the self. So the self must remain reflexive of the similarities and unique differences of everything around. And it only when the self recognizes the power of nature constituted by every system that we can have effective shaping of social reality. So now we move to cultural degradation and cultural genocide. Cultural genocide means the loss of a particular culture due to the assimilation or loss of interest. Assimilation happens when a dominant culture is overshadows an inferior culture, which leads to the inferior culture to lose its identity. Okay. So, ang example dito, okay, sa cultural degradation, kasi sinasabi niya that culture is also not a force, but a causal agent in the world, but a context in which people live out their life. So, cultural genocide or cultural degradation is when you put a stop, okay, in transmitting the values, the beliefs, the ways of life, okay? Kung ano yung ginagawa ninyo ngayon, okay? At kung hindi na kayo interesado na magpasalin lahi pa siya, then you will put a stop on it. Okay? So, for example, mas gusto ninyo yung kultura noon wherein yung mga bata ay marunong rumespeto sa mga nakakatanda by pagmamano sa kamay ng mga nakatatanda at ang paggamit ng po at opo sa pakikipag-usap sa mga nakakatanda. Okay. So, gusto ninyong ibalik yon sa panahon nyo ngayon sa generation ninyo. Okay? At gusto ninyong to put a stop sa, sa style ng mga bata ngayon na hindi na marunong mag-bless sa nakakatanda. Hi, hello na lang. Hi, auntie. Hello, uncle. Pero hindi na nagbe-bless. And then because of language, right? Kasi influence ng TV. Okay? So, mas maraming kabataan na ngayon, lalo na kapag lagi silang nanonood ng YouTube, for example. Okay? Ang mga kabataan ay mas natututo na silang magsalita ng English. Okay? So, nahahasahin kasi day in, day out, yun yung napapanood nila ng mga cartoons sa YouTube. Okay? So, pag nakipag-usap na sila sa mga kasambahay nila, English na din ang ginagamit nila. So, nakakalimutan na nilang gamitin yung salita talaga ng lugar nila. So, for example, Ilocano, nakakalimutan na nilang mag-Ilocano o nakakalimutan na nilang mag-Pangasinense o kung ano man yung dialect sa lugar na kinabibilangan nila. Okay? Why? Because of the influence of TV. Lagi silang nanonood ng YouTube, cartoon sa YouTube, wherein puro sila English. Kaya, ayun, mas natuto na silang, mas na-acquire nila yung English language compared to their own dialect. Okay? And to put a stop on it, if you want to put a stop on that one, of course, you will going to limit the screen time of those children. And then, you will going to talk to them in your own dialect. Hindi English, hindi Tagalog. If you want to put a stop at gusto ninyo na magpatuloy pa din, okay, for enculturation to happen, then bring back the old culture, the old way of life, kung ano man yon, and then put a stop kung ano man yung ginagawa nila ngayon na ayaw ninyo at hindi kayo sang-ayon. Okay? So, yun yung pinagkaiba ng enculturation at cultural genocide. When you talk about enculturation, you wanted to carry on practicing the culture that kaya isasalin mo siya to the next generation. Okay? So, but if you want to put a stop on a certain in anthropology, then cultural self is recognized as biologically programmed to react to his surroundings. Okay? Biologically programmed. Why? Because sabi nga nila, tayo ay produkto ng biology at ng environment. At for culture to be transmitted or to ensure na it will be transmitted to the next generation, ikaw mismo, individual mismo, is a perfect carrier or the perfect vehicle for that culture to move forward or to be carried forward to the next generation. Kasi sabi, you are biologically programmed to react to the surroundings. Also, in anthropology, the self is recognized as a varying level of self-awareness of the culture, cultural influences at work within oneself. Since we are aware kung ano yung katanggap-tanggap at hindi katanggap-tanggap na ways of life o kultura, okay? We have the ability to decide. We have the ability to practice, okay? And to respect, okay? Kung ano man yung pagkakaiba-iba ng kultura within the same environment na ginagalawan natin. We have that innate awareness, or we have the capacity, okay, na maging aware sa ating kapaligiran. Okay? And then also, self is recognized as reflexive of one's own individuality and the differences in other people and the world around them. Then again, since we are aware that one of the characteristics of the self is uniqueness and individuality, we recognize the fact that we are all individual, that we are all unique. Okay? And because of that fact, we learn to respect. Okay? We learn to respect kung ano yung paniniwala ng iba. Okay? And we are reflexive or reflective. Okay? Kung gusto nating i-adapt yung kultura na yon o hindi nating i-adapt, kung makakatulong ba siya sa atin o hindi siya makakatulong sa atin. Okay? And that's how anthropology recognize the self. Okay? So, that's all. So, the next discussion would be another topic, and that's for another session. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.